New Orleans Saints owner Gayle Benson has the back of general manager Mickey Loomis, and that should be no surprise. We got all of that and a little bit of lagniappe for you on today's episode of Locked On Saints.
You are Locked On Saints, your daily New Orleans Saints podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is good, Who Dat Nation and Who Dat family? I am your host, your friend, Ross Jackson, New Orleans native, your New Orleans Saints expert and credentialed member of the media covering those New Orleans Saints as a Saints beat writer over at LouisianaSports.net. And on today's episode of Locked On Saints, my good friend Doug Mouton from WWL TV is going to join us here, my co-host over at the Ultimate New Orleans Sports Show. We're going to go into what has been what presents the biggest concern for New Orleans moving forward, but also what is generating the most excitement about the New Orleans Saints. We'll take a look at the Atlanta Falcons, who seem to be on a bit of a tailspin. Could the New Orleans Saints be catching them at the right time? We'll break all that down, and we're going to kick everything off with a look here at Gayle Benson. This is just going to be me, but take a look at Gayle Benson, the owner of the New Orleans Saints, and her comments on Mickey Loomis, unsurprisingly backing the general manager. Let's get to all that as we continue on with today's episode. We appreciate you very much, as always, whether it's your first time or your next time, being here with us this time, making us your first listen, and being an everydayer here on the show, which is a proud part of Locked On Podcast Network, the #1 sports podcast network. Thank you very much for helping us get here as we bring you your team every day. New Orleans Saints owner Gayle Benson backs Mickey Loomis, calls for his dismissal or his firing, quote, ridiculous. And none of that should be surprising. And honestly, I'm not even saying that in a negative way. I just mean that this is what we have described for so long about what this rebuild is going to look like for New Orleans and how the relationship between the Saints and Mickey Loomis is going to be colored moving forward. Here's the fact, right? And this is we've talked about this before. So if you're an everydayer, this will ring a bell. But here's the fact. Mickey Loomis hired Sean Payton. Sean Payton left. The New Orleans Saints did not decide to go into a rebuild when they should have, which is when Sean Payton stepped away. I think I just said he retired, but he stepped away and then obviously came back in time to go and take over the Denver Broncos. There's conversation about how he actually wanted to come back here, but the Saints didn't want to displace Dennis Allen. I would have displaced Dennis Allen in a heartbeat if I were them, and if that is true. But whatever happened there, the Saints did not go into the rebuild that they should have gone into. Instead, they promoted from within and tried to maintain the long line of Payton's success, a decade and a half of Payton's success. The issue is that they didn't have Payton, and therefore they didn't have success. And oh, by the way, they also didn't have Drew Brees. The Saints should have started their rebuild at that point, right then, right there. And if you're going to start the rebuild at that point, right then, right there, Mickey Loomis was always at that point, right then, right there, going to get the opportunity to lead the rebuild. Instead, the Saints pushed off the rebuild. And then they said, we're gonna be competitive. We're gonna contend. We're gonna be competitive. All this stuff. Proton Dennis Allen. Dennis Allen won a game in Tampa that one time, and that's gonna mean that he's gonna win every game here in New Orleans. It's gonna be awesome. And then obviously none of that happened, right? And in that situation just got worse and worse and worse every year until eventually Dennis Allen became the first head coach fired in season by the New Orleans Saints in something like 4 decades. And look, that was a firing that was warranted, right? Things did not get better under Dennis Allen. They only got worse. The team had to make a decision, and I think they made the right decision. Then the Saints had their chance to maybe even extend even further. They could have appointed Darren Rizzi, another Payton disciple, as their head coach and then moved things forward. My understanding is that if Darren Rizzi would have been hired as the head coach, he would have had Lou Anarumo was his desired defensive coordinator, and Chip Kelly was his desired offensive coordinator. Now, I'll be honest, that would have been a lot of fun to watch. But the Saints instead go and they hire the offensive young coach, the wunderkind, if you will, in Kellen Moore, youngest head coach in the NFL, active, right, in today's NFL. And then now from that, didn't really look like they were going to go into a rebuild, did they? It looked like they were going to try to push things ahead with Derek Carr, and then they were going to try to move things forward. But then Derek Carr retired. Mickey Loomis got $30 million back on that. I still cannot wait for the 30 for 30 on those $30 million on how that all came out. I hope eventually we get that story. But Tyrann Mathieu retires. It's time for a rebuild. Then the Saints began their rebuild. But even at that time, never really embraced the rebuild situation. It wasn't until the Saints were 1-6 that Mickey Loomis went on WWL radio and started talking about this being a development year. And then in her conversation with Jeff Duncan over at the Times-Picayune, owner Gayle Benson referred to this year as a rebuilding year, saying that they were honest about that from the very beginning and that everyone should have had that expectation. They were not honest about that from the very beginning. No one should have had that expectation. It's what everyone wanted, however. So now everything is simpatico, right? People wanted a rebuild. The Saints are admitting that it's a rebuild. This is where we are. But what that means is, and the reason why it's not surprising that Gayle Benson is backing Mickey Loomis, is because A, you always back somebody publicly, right? You never throw somebody under the bus publicly. You're just not going to do that. Second, or B, A, B, my 1, 2, 3s or my ABCs, which one should I be doing? B, you have to give, or you don't have to, but I knew, and we all knew, that the Saints were going to give Mickey Loomis an opportunity to rebuild this team. He now has that opportunity. Now he has to make good on this opportunity, right? He's got to do this right. Because eventually, turnover on coaching staff, turnover on roster, all that other stuff, eventually you become the common denominator if things continue to fail. And so that's what Mickey Loomis has to avoid, right? Mickey Loomis has an opportunity here to lead this team through a rebuild. The 2025 draft class is looking very, very promising in terms of a first step towards that. The Saints needed it in 2006. They got it. The Saints needed it in 2017. They got it. The Saints needed it in 2025. They might have got it again. And now they have another important draft on the way and another important offseason on the way in 2026. And so him getting the opportunity to guide them through that rebuild is what we all expected, or should have expected, certainly what we expected here on the show, but also could be the kind of last chance here, right? Ideally for Mickey Loomis, Kellen Moore is the last head coach he hires, because Kellen Moore goes on to have a long tenure as a New Orleans Saints head coach. It's a great and successful time, all that other stuff. And then he ends up, calling it a career at some point during Kellen Moore's tenure, because Kellen Moore's around for so long. Like, that's the best case scenario for Mickey Loomis. But the opposite side of that is that this Kellen Moore hire doesn't work. The rebuild over the course of 2025 and 2026 doesn't work. And then the Saints eventually point and go, who's the common denominator here? And then everything will fall on the general manager at that point. So while there is patience, while there is a backing and support from ownership around Mickey Loomis and making the decisions necessary moving forward to try to guide this rebuild, there will still be repercussions if this rebuild does not happen or does not find success. And so I think that's the biggest thing that maybe is never going to be said, but we all know is the truth. And so if the perception is that Mickey Loomis had a misstep after Sean Payton left and then promoted from within and tried to extend the competition, then had an opportunity to rebuild following that, and then wasn't able to do that, then the fingers are eventually going to be pointed at him. So while there's support, while there's opportunity here when it comes to Mickey Loomis, it doesn't mean that he's just got like this free ride to where it's not going to matter how the team performs over the course of the next 5 to 10 years. Like, eventually there will be repercussions if things don't work out. But as of right now, there's a lot of promising signs. And so we'll see if those promising signs turn into success for Mickey Loomis, for Gayle Benson, for the New Orleans Saints, and perhaps most importantly for you, the fan that has continued to support this team despite those missteps, miscues, the losing seasons, things getting worse. And now you're hoping that things are on that stairway to getting much, much better ahead. Speaking of getting much, much better ahead, this show is about to get a lot better. Much, much better ahead, because our good friend Doug Mouton from WWL is here, and we're going to be jumping in, having a conversation about the Atlanta Falcons and how the Saints might be catching them at the perfect time. Let's get to that next as we continue on with today's episode of Locked On Saints, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode of Locked On Saints is brought to you by our friends over at Prize Picks. The NFL season continues to roll along, so as you continue to pay attention to the NFL, but maybe you're also following the NBA, there's no better time and place to jump in on the action than right now with Prize Picks. If you haven't tried it yet, Prize Picks is super, super easy to navigate, and it's the simplest way to play. All you got to do is choose more or less on player projections that Prize Picks sets. If you get those right, you win. It takes less than 60 seconds to set your lineup, and you can play anywhere that Prize Picks operates. fast and easy withdrawals. They even have their injury reboot as well, which saves your lineup, which could potentially save your lineup from a loss. So much for you to check out. So go and download the PrizePicks app today and use code LOCKEDONNFL to get $50 in lineups when you play your first $5 lineup. That is promo code LOCKEDONNFL for $50 in lineups when you play your first $5 lineup. Pick 2 to 6 players. That's all you got to do over at PrizePicks, where it's good to be right. All right, family. The Atlanta Falcons are an interesting team because there was so much hype about them going into the 2025 season, but yet they've continued to underperform all the way down to the point where the Atlanta Falcons and our good friend Aaron Freeman over at Locked On Falcons are saying that the team might need to move on from its head coach and potentially its general manager as well. So I start off here with Doug Mouton with a simple question. Are the Atlanta Falcons in a worse situation than the New Orleans Saints? Because it sure feels like they are.
Look, I absolutely definitely think it's worse, for one, because this is what we expected out of the Saints. We were just hoping that they'd be catching some momentum by the end of the year. We knew this was not a playoff year. In Atlanta, they had legitimate that maybe not well-founded expectations that they were going to be significantly better, and they're just not. They have some elite weapons and not a ton else on that team. And, I mean, I feel so bad that they're struggling in Atlanta. It hurts me. Or it doesn't hurt me at all, and I have found it to be one of the funniest stories of the year so far is that the Falcons are grossly underperforming.
It is interesting that we can now add the Atlanta Falcons to a long list of teams that win the offseason but can't win in the regular season. Yeah. And like it's so interesting how that plays out, to where every time there's this big winner of an offseason, the lack of ability to actually create success in the regular season. Because I think in this upcoming game between the Saints and the Falcons, which will be next weekend, that the Falcons are a beatable team.
Oh, the Falcons are extremely beatable. 100% I would agree with that. And look, the biggest single thing with the Falcons is that they invested an 8th pick in the draft in Michael Penix, the 8th pick. When you make the 8th pick, you better hit on that guy. And he has not hit yet and has shown that maybe he's not the guy, and they may have wasted an 8th pick in the draft. That's a huge pick to miss on. And a lot of their troubles has been Michael Penix just hasn't been particularly good so far. And so you have Bijan Robinson and Drake London, these elite weapons, and you're just not getting to them because your quarterback hasn't been great. Look, anybody who doesn't think quarterback is the first, second, and third most important position on a team, just look at the Falcons. They're a great example. They're getting mediocre quarterback play, and they've had a poor season so far.
It's so interesting, too, that 2 of their biggest additions over the course of the past few years are guys that were tied to the Saints at some point. There was all that conversation around before Clint Kubiak was hired, them looking at Zach Robinson, the offensive coordinator there coming out of Los Angeles, and how those 2 guys were kind of 1A, 1B in that hiring cycle for that position of offensive coordinator. The Saints go with Kubiak. They get an okay year there that was decimated by injury, but look how successful Kubiak is now over in the Pacific Northwest with Seattle. Meanwhile, Zach Robinson lands with his old buddy Raheem Morris over in Atlanta. It's not working out. And then Michael Penix, who you just referenced, there was all this connection about, the Saints were interested in Michael Penix, which we know has been debunked now, but that was a big narrative in that draft. Both those guys end up in Atlanta. Both guys end up being, let's say, questionable at best for right now. And people are feeling pretty good about the Saints and their 40th overall pick in Tyler Shough. And now they have Kellen Moore calling their plays on offense.
Yeah, and Terry Fontenot, of course, being the biggest connection between the guy calling the shots, longtime Saints guy. Look, if the Saints missed on Tyler Shough, it's okay to miss on the 40th pick. You can get away with missing on the 40th pick. Missing on the 8th pick, it's obviously not the same thing. It is grossly different, and it's not just that the miss, it's the time invested in him and the time that he's playing and the time that he's not delivering. That's wasted time on Bijan Robinson and Drake London. And those guys now get closer to their free agency years while your quarterback is not playing well. It's not like you're sitting on those guys and you're going to have them for 10 years. You've got them right now at contracts you can afford, and that's not going to be true in a couple of years. So you needed Penix to hit, and he has not. And the Falcons have been disappointing across the board. It's not just Penix. But look, it starts with the quarterback. You saw that talk about starting with the quarterback. You saw, I think the Saints played better in all aspects because Tyler Shough I think Tyler Shough made people say, wow, in the first possession last week. And they looked up, and then everybody plays harder. And it's the same. You feed off your quarterback, and I think the Falcons have, and they're 3-6 feeding off of that.
Yeah, so now the big thing that Atlanta really invested in over the course of this offseason were those edge rushers, bringing in some very, very good, talented players. James Pierce Jr. was one of my favorites in this past draft class. They doubled up at edge rusher, bringing in more talent there. Do you feel that they present a unique challenge there for New Orleans, or is it not as different as what they faced up against, let's say, the Los Angeles Rams just 2 weeks ago?
Oh, no, I definitely think the Rams are the best team, the best defensive team they will play, certainly in that second half of the season. They are not the Rams. Look, the Falcons are still a better team than 3-6. If you've watched them play, the eyeball test will tell you they've been in so many games and just haven't been able to get it done offensively. No, look, they're a good defensive team. And look, if I had to bet money on the Saints and Falcons, the Falcons are still in better shape than the Saints. The Saints are still in rebuild mode in a big way.
Gayle Benson actually said the word. She actually said the word rebuild about the team,
which is incredible, right? So look, the Falcons are a tough team for the Saints right now. Honestly, almost any team in the NFL is going to be a tough team for the Saints right now. That said, the Falcons have been incredibly disappointing, but they still are talented.
Yeah. Am I crazy for feeling like new quarterback, the coming off of the win, having the bye week at home, big rivalry game? Am I crazy for feeling like the Saints can actually win this game?
Oh, they definitely can. There's no question about that. And the momentum, that's what all of us are trying to figure out right now.
Yeah, right.
How much of what we saw is real? And look, it was real, but is it sustainable real? Is it a one blip real? Look, as a kid, Ross, I went to all the Saints games when they were horrible. And once a year, there was one year they beat the Dallas Cowboys, I don't know, like 73 maybe, when the Cowboys won the Super Bowl that year. Like, NFL teams can muster up one great performance. You see that all the time, that a bad team pulls the upset and then finishes the year with 4 wins. So certainly that can happen. But look, the Saints, if it's real, then the Saints absolutely have a shot to win. If it's not as real as we wish it was, then we'll see the Falcons. But this week's going to tell us a lot about what we're going to see over these last 7.
It's a really good point, because I think a lot of the conversation around Tyler Shough coming out of the Carolina game was, well, it was Carolina, right? And then all of a sudden they weren't a 5-4 team with a winning record. They weren't a team that had beat the Packers anymore. They were just the Panthers after the Saints beat them. And so considering that, are the Falcons at least a good enough team that if the Saints get a win and let's say Tyler Shough looks good, that you can actually take that and keep that for what it is? Like, can you hang your hat on a victory against Atlanta?
Yeah, absolutely. I no question about it. We need to see in these last 7 games, and we don't need to see him do it 7 times. We need to see the Saints team that we saw this past week against the Panthers. We need to see that team, and we need to see that Tyler Shough a few more times on the back end of this schedule. Again, don't need to see it 7 times, but would love to see it 7 times. But we need to see it a couple times. We need to see that what we saw is real. And I will say this, from watching Shough, Ross, the things he did certainly seem sustainable. His arm's not going to get worse. He's not going to, he's got the big tools. And the way he navigated the pocket and stayed calm. I mean, I can't imagine you stay calm in week 1 and then lose the calm. You know what I mean? Like, the things he did well, beneath the surface were things that sure seem sustainable, which is why this coming week against the Falcons is going to be so exciting, is that I think it's real. I think the things we saw are legit. We need some proof.
All right, coming up next, Doug and I are going to dive into what concerns us the most about the New Orleans Saints down the stretch and what it is that maybe should generate the most excitement. And a lot of this has to do with the young players that the New Orleans Saints are finding success with. But first, a little bit of the concern is where they've funneled a lot of resources and haven't necessarily found the success that they're looking for. Let's dive into that next as we continue on with today's episode of Locked On Saints, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode of Locked On Saints is brought to you by our friends over at Game Time. The NFL season continues to roll along, and honestly, there's no better place to be than in the stadium rooting for your favorite team, surrounded by your friends, family, and other fans. And of course, with a big game this weekend between the New Orleans Saints, or next weekend rather, between the New Orleans Saints and the Atlanta Falcons, massive rivalry game. You know you want to be in the Caesar Superdome for that one. So make sure you go and check out Game Time today, where you get 100% authentic tickets that are delivered on time and are all at the best price. Plus, with fees included, you pay what you see. I pulled up Game Time, and in just a couple of taps, I saw some amazing deals. Talk about your favorite NFL games for as low as $100. So download the Game Time app today, create an account, and use the promo code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off of your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, that's promo code LOCKEDON NFL for $20 off. Swipe, tap, ticket, go. Download Game Time today. Let's get it, Who Dat Nation. Wrap it up today's show with a look at what's ahead for the New Orleans Saints. We'll get to what the most exciting things around the team feel like they are right now. But Doug and I are going to start off with what we call our boil water advisory. The thing that makes you cringe a little bit about the team is something that we do every week over on the Ultimate New Orleans Sports Show, what you can find at WWL TV and on the WWL Plus app. So we start off with our boil water advisory with Doug, but what it is that maybe concerns you the most about this team down the stretch.
Well, look, the boil water advisory, and it's changed. And let me tell you how it's changed. My boil water advisory 2 weeks ago was that the two position groups you invested the most in this offseason, because you couldn't fix everything, were offensive line and defensive back. The offensive line was really underperforming, but I've been watching Kelvin Banks more, and I think the last 2 weeks have been his best 2 weeks.
Completely
I think he is getting better, and I'm starting to think, okay, well, my boil water advisory, I'm starting to feel a little bit better about what they built on the offensive line. And then with DBs too, what you see with Quincy Riley keeps getting better. So maybe the positions they invested in. But look, my boil water advisory right now is people are starting to get a little excited in 1 week. The Saints win a couple on the back end, especially if they beat the Falcons. You're going to get people more excited. But the truth is, the boil water advisory is this roster still needs help across the board. We were talking about that during the Ultimate New Orleans Sports Show. Ross, it was my single favorite line of the show. And Ricardo said, they need help a lot of places. And you said, throw a dart. And as I'm sitting there laughing, I'm thinking, that is literally the most perfect analogy, because you could throw a dart. They need a lot of help. And I'm hoping that people in New Orleans will manage. I think they've done a lot of things right. And I think more so than a lot of media members that they are on the right track. But I also acknowledge that there is a long way to go before this is a legitimate, sustainable playoff team. And I'm hoping people don't over-expect if they get a win or two, because this roster still needs to throw darts.
Yes, I completely agree. Actually, it's funny. That's exactly right along the lines of what I was going to say. I was worried that the idea of patience would now begin to wear thin because some success was seen. Right. But patience has to go both ways. You have to remain patient through the losses, and in some cases through a rebuild, which the team is now all of a sudden calling this situation. Yeah. That you also have to have patience through the success when you see it. And that the idea of promise is not the same thing as production, right? The idea of looking like you are competitive in one game does not make you a contender, right? Like those things are not the same thing. Being competitive is not the same thing as being in contention. And so I think that's my big thing too, is that if the Saints come out of this game up against the Carolina Panthers and lose against the Atlanta Falcons at home, and then maybe lose another game on the road in Miami, and then they have to go to Tampa to take on the Buccaneers, which is a better, like the one actual better football team or good football team that they play down the stretch. There could quickly be a lack of patience because of the semblance of success.
Yeah, I agree with that 100%, and that's very well said. But what I will say, that during the second it was a 4-game losing streak, then a win, then another 4-game losing streak, then a win. During that second 4-game losing streak, I heard a lot of people, and it was media members who wouldn't say it publicly, but were starting to say it privately. And then friends of mine, I got a bunch of friends of mine that are season ticket holders that were starting to lose confidence in Kellen Moore. And look, it's year one. And no matter how bad it is in year one, to me, you got one of like a Mouton staple is you can't call someone a failure until you give them a chance to fail. And
Agreed.
No matter what happens in year one, Kellen Moore's not a failure. You got to give him a chance to start building this thing. I just kept telling people, it's like, I don't know. I'm not saying he's going to be a great coach. I'm just saying you can't say he's a terrible coach yet, because the fact is nobody knows at this point. I mean, obviously you can guess, and some of us get paid to guess, but I saw people jumping off the bandwagon in a big way in the second 4-game losing streak. And in one game, I see people saying, oh, okay, maybe
I see it.
Maybe I was wrong. And that's a good thing. I think we need to teeter that line. You're right. It's teetering the line between I see what they're doing, but I also see that it's a long way away. And people in New Orleans, I mean, we love when the Saints win. I haven't lived any place else like this, but I would say nobody jumps on a bandwagon like New Orleans does. And when they start winning, it's going to be bananas in town. It's just, I hope people understand we're not there yet.
Yeah. I'll tell you, I lived in Los Angeles for many, many years, and I'm still not completely sure the city knows that they have a football team. I will tell you that. Or in fact, they've got two. They've got two on top of all that. All right, let's wrap up on a positive note there. Those are the things that maybe concern us a little bit. But whatever the opposite of a boil water advisory, I guess it's the wonderful 60-degree weather we're having right now. We can go outside. What is it about the Saints that's got you excited right now?
Well, look, first of all, Tyler Shough. Tyler Shough is 1, 2, and 3 in a list of 5. But I'll say this too: I was putting together a list for one of my touchscreens earlier this week, and I really did kind of a deep dive into this rookie class. And this rookie class, if Shough is who he might be, Kelvin Banks the last couple of weeks has really played better. I have liked Jonas Sanker from the start. I think Quincy Riley has played better. I know you're big on Danny Stutzman, and the more I looked at him, the better he looks. That is a heck of a 1-year rookie class. Like, that's a nice found. The way to win in the NFL is to have enough rookies, and they'll be on a rookie contract for 4 years, to have enough of those guys that you can afford to go get a couple of superstars in free agency. And the way you're able to afford those guys is by the rookie contracts. And right now, they look like they're going to have a few really solid starting rookie contracts. And that, to me, has me optimistic because of what they can do, but also of what that can mean when the Saints go out and actually start spending money, which they always have. They haven't had a lot of money the last couple of years. When they've had it, they have spent it. And I think they're going to go out and spend. I don't know if it's this offseason, but this rookie class makes that possible. Yeah.
And look, even last year when they didn't have a lot of money, they still, re-signed Juwan Johnson on a 3-year, $30+ million deal. They brought in Justin Reed. They re-signed Chase Young. So you're absolutely right. They will find money, and then they will immediately find a way to spend it.
They will invent the money.
Yes, right. I think the thing for me that's so exciting beyond I completely agree with you on the rookie class. I think the other thing that makes me so excited, or that has generated some excitement around where the Saints are, is the way that they have been able to keep the other side of that roster, the veteran side of that roster, playing hard and committed.
No doubt.
Despite that 1-8 start. Those 2 4-game win streaks, a quarterback change in the middle. Like, there's a lot of opportunities there for a veteran guy to go, you know what? I'm just going to collect my check, make my way through this, everything like that. Like, I'm going to go out there, I'm going to play, but I'm just going to kind of, cycle way through this. We've seen it, right? And so for the Saints to go out there and perform the way that they did, and the best player on the football field all weekend up against Carolina was Demario Davis, right? Mm-hmm. 36, 14 years, 30+ years old in the NFL. Cam Jordan gets a sack. He's 1.5 now away from a $30,000 incentive in his contract. And then you have guys like Chris Olave, who I know is not a veteran, a young vet, if you will, but he's on, Kay Adams' show talking about how he wants to be in New Orleans forever. And so you're hearing all of this stuff that none of them need to say, that none of them need to be doing, and that performing at a level that none of them need to be performing at for a losing football team, or a team that was a losing football team. Now they're the greatest team ever made. But before that, they were, a losing football team. And you get all those players playing at that high level. and you have all those players willing to say, I want to be here. I think that's reason for excitement for Saints fans.
Yeah, that's so well said. And I could not agree more. And Chase Young, look, Chase, you know this. I talk about Chase Young all the time. He's one of my favorite players that the Saints have had in the last 10 years. He did not have a particularly big statistical game against the Panthers, but you watch him in that game, and he is playing high motor, excited, high-fiving everybody that made a play. Yeah. He is 100% bought in. And when I see that, he was one of the guys that I was like, man, I can't believe how tuned in. It wasn't a game like he had 3 sacks, and it's easy to get excited when you have 3 sacks. He didn't. He was so excited for everybody else. The way the team played with energy and emotion and excitement at 1-8. I mean, give me a break. That does not happen a lot, and it did, and it has. And again, that's if I'm unsure about Kellen Moore. What you just described is a reason to 100% give him the benefit of the doubt right now. Exactly what you said, because that comes from the top down.
Yeah, it's a great point. When we're talking about a roster, you got to throw a dart at. It's the same thing about that roster, not necessarily being the roster that the coaching staff wanted to build just yet, and all that. Like, there's still so many changes on the way, but yet all these guys seem completely bought in. That's Doug Mouton. Thank you very much, Doug, for taking the time. Make sure you come and check us out over at the Ultimate New Orleans Sports Show as well every week over on WWL TV at their YouTube page as well as WWL Plus. Always a pleasure, Doug. Thanks for taking the time.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Ross. That was fun.
All right, fam. Hope that you enjoyed that. Make sure you go and check out Doug with all of his great work over at WWL TV with Channel 4. And of course, the Ultimate New Orleans Sports Show, which we do weekly on the WWL Plus app and at WWL TV's YouTube page. Make sure you come and check us out there because we talk more than Saints. We get into some LSU, we get into some Tulane, we go into some Pelicans as well. But a lot of Saints focus there. So make sure you come through. It's a ton of fun. And we make a cocktail every day on the show too, which is always a blast for me. So make sure you come and check us out. We appreciate you very much as always for making us a part of your day, part of your routine, for saying yes to me and the show. If you see me, please say hi. And if you need anything else around your New Orleans Saints in between these episodes, make sure you follow me on your favorite social media at Ross Jackson, NOLA. Hit me up. Know what the family's doing, how you living. Let me know how you momming them. And trust you, that nation. I'll holla at you.